continuation of the webinar that we began last week on online learning, and is part of, I guess, what's looking like a continuous series that started in August with the digital economy, and then transitioned into the future of work. And then from there, because the future of work is really a major issue among young kids today, and whether or not they're getting educated in what they will need to function in the digital economy. And then of course, COVID hit, and that really messes up everything. It's very hard to know what's going on when you've been accelerated into space that everybody was forecasting will be sometime in the future, and all of a sudden became now. So the discussions we had last week were rich and incorporated in the newsletter. And we've decided to continue with that topic. And as some said, well, we cut it short, let's continue. So I'm going to throw a question out early, which we really didn't touch last week, which was the question of curriculum, which is not specific to online learning, may in fact be constrained by online learning, or may in fact even be facilitated by online learning. So without any further ado, you can put your hands up, or you can see down at the bottom, there's an opportunity to raise your hand, but I usually just look at the screen, and if I see somebody's hands up that wants to sort of begin and make a comment, let's start with that as a first question. How is curriculum affected, or how should it be affected, either through online learning or in education itself? So ahead, laura-belle, you're muted, but go ahead, you can kick it off. Unless you can't get unmuted.
There, okay.
You're on.
Hello. So I wanted to actually make a note of something that was said last week, and I didn't catch it in time to respond. There was the observation that children learn how to learn when they start kindergarten. So in kindergarten, they're learning how to learn. And that actually is wrong. Children start learning from the day they're born.
Right.
And when they get to kindergarten, they're learning how to condense themselves to fit a curriculum. So it's curriculum training is what this is. So I wanted to mention that. Sorry, I'm gasping for breath today.
Have a drink.
Oh, I am. But I'll do my best, and I won't be too long. And one of the things when we speak about education, we didn't talk about what children were learning, and if there's something beyond curriculum. So to Claire's point, I will touch on that, because I think of my childhood and what we were required to learn, and then tell me how much of this actually happens in a curriculum-based environment, whether it be in school or online. So literacy, of course, critical thinking, and that's really important now when people are lining up to lie to us. Mechanical aptitude, that would have been my brother and me taking everything apart and then being forced to put it back together again. Music, I was playing piano when I was 4, recorded 3 albums by the time I was 20. Numeracy, by the time I hit grade 6 here in Canada, my math was at a grade 9 level. Adornment, so sewing and crafting and so on. Built space, how to construct a place to live. Nature, land, weather awareness. All of our children were cloud watchers by the time we were 5 years old. And we understood the importance of nature. Food provisioning, which isn't just about growing the food, but how to prepare it, how to preserve it, how not to waste it. Orality and speech, reading out loud, a big part of that. Reading out loud with a marble in your mouth, make sure you can actually speak very clearly. And in addition to those core life competencies, which is what that's called, we have the social skills that are critical for ensuring healthy community and cohesive society. So we're talking about things like interpersonal and socialization skills, leadership and decision-making skills, and healing and life transition skills, and then there's the transcendence. So my take on this whole thing is that when it comes to educating our children, there's only so much that can be done through online curriculum and online engagements. I think a large part of it will be the communities, because the acculturation of the child happens in the communities. The households, the families are too small to provide what the children need in order to develop fully. So that's my take. Thank you very much.
Okay, go ahead. Jackie, you want to pitch in and add, subtract, or argue?
Yeah, and just to extrapolate a few things, because I'm more about adult learning, and I can reach down to high school, but not as down to the grade schools like laura-belle is talking about. But I think laura-belle said a couple times ago, also you're learning from your culture. So whether it's around your kitchen table, whether it's your parents, the school teachers, people at church, wherever your community may be. And that community has values, and that community shows you what is important, directly or indirectly. And I think that as we remove so much of that on hands-on or in-person things, we're getting taught by what's important through the digital screens, and it seems we're missing out on it quite a bit. But I do like what a few people said last time and the one before. When we ask the question, is online learning working, it really does depend, right? So if you're an adult or of a sufficient age or in a certain type of profession or industry, maybe you've got enough inner learning that you can apply what's online. And it's more critical thinking. If you're, I just saw in the chat, if there's hands-on things, well, how are you gonna learn how to hands-on? You can see a demo on the YouTube, but then do you really know how to do it? And that goes back to assessment and testing. So it just is such a broad question.
I want to make a comment here. I think we need to be a bit careful about how much you load up on, quote, education as a responsibility of the education system. It seems to me every time we talk about, quote, learning, somehow we think that means education. And I think you pointed out, laura-belle, there's much of what individuals need to learn to become citizens or productive that go beyond, quote, what education is or can do. And when we get into socialization, some say that's family, that's community, and we've got to be careful not to load all of that up on, quote, the education system. That ought to be controversial enough. I see a couple of nodding heads, but I think he's going to sleep. So anyone want to pitch in and make a comment about whether or not we're expecting too much? Because if it's just imparting knowledge, reading and writing and arithmetic, it's conceivable that online can compete. But obviously, when we get into socialization and factors that relate to interpersonal or connectivity, we're going to have challenges.
And Perry, I'll jump back in here for a second with the socialization piece, is that far too many kids are getting to kindergarten and even going through grade school to high school and so on with very poor socialization skills because they didn't have the foundation early enough. And I think we are trying to load too much on our school systems, that they're actually having to do too much for too diverse a crowd of children, like the different capabilities and so on. And so that needs to be addressed. It's not just looking at the curriculum, but looking at the curriculum and community and seeing where, when governments start planning learning for children, be it formal education or community learning, like the acculturation, then make sure that both sides are covered, that there is thought put into the opportunities for the children in both arenas, because the community arena will teach a whole lot and make the curriculum portion, the part that the school boards need to manage, it would make it that much easier for the teachers, and it would make it that much more valuable to the children.
Well, I'm not quite sure whether or not the education system has evolved to the point that it's willing to work with those that take some responsibility for socialization, or that parents don't understand there's a point where the school can't be everything. In Finland, for example, I think they're recognizing, and in Sweden as well, that we're sending kids to school too early. and the opportunity to play in the woods or play with other kids or just learn to play and learn to socialize through play is being denied once they're put into becoming rigidified within a curriculum-based school system. So maybe we're putting kids into the system too early. Go ahead, Ken.
So the issue of that you raised originally, which says, are we putting too much onto the education system? I don't know whether it's putting it on the education system per se, as opposed to saying we need some equity in the education system. People from certain households certainly have advantages over others just by virtue of the environment they grew up in or whatever. Now, are we leaving 10% behind or 50% behind by just saying, no, the education system is not responsible for that? So I think it's not a nice binary choice of it is or isn't. I think there are a number of things that the education system plays a huge role in. And I think that we get equity in society from health services and education.
So equity, it's an interesting concept. So the one approach is to fail no one and move everybody on regardless. Some say that's how we're achieving equity today, as kids are graduating without a fraction of what one would assume that they have acquired. So how do you measure when enough is enough? I mean, I get confused by this concept of, quote, equity, that everybody's going to get the same or end up the same.
Well, I don't think everyone ends up the same. As with everything in life, there's huge differences between us all. The question, or at least I go back to attending my kids' kindergarten orientation, where I wasn't terribly anxious to go, but I went and sat in one of those little chairs, and this little old lady comes out and says, "You are not your brain." So that sort of woke me up and said, well, I better listen here. And she did a wonderful program, essentially saying education isn't really training per se. And the you are not your brain thing was the brain is the computer, the you is the operator of the computer. And what we have to do in education is to impact the you so that you use the brain more appropriately. So I thought about that, and I thought it was a kind of neat concept, and I thought it was, I wholeheartedly supported it. But I have other reasons now to believe something other than that. But education in socialization at the front end is the important aspect.
Okay, so I think we've addressed the socialization side, and you've indicated that part of education is, and this was emphasized last time, is teaching kids to become learners. It isn't just imparting knowledge on them, but teaching them to become learners. Tom, I think you were next, and I'll go to Randy. Tom, you're muted. Okay, Randy, you go first until Tom gets unmuted.
I'll get in there.
Go ahead, Randy.
I could agree more with Ken. I was thinking last week when you folks were all talking, spent 7 years on the Senate with the University of Alberta. And we had a program called Youth School. We were bringing grade 9 students in from all over the city to have several weeks at the university. And the biggest shock to me was 2/3 of those kids that came had never been across the Saskatchewan River to the south side. And so many were really disadvantaged from a computer equipment perspective. And boy, oh boy, when you start looking at what's happening nowadays in schools, I do a lot of work with teachers, and boy, having the equipment and the web access and the download speeds for a lot of these kids is a real problem for them.
So what was the objective of that program? Just give the kids exposure to
give kids exposure to the university, and it was just been the most exciting program. Most of them had never, like I said, they'd never been to the university campus at all. So we had a graduation ceremony for them. We're continuing doing it every year. It's really mind-opening as to how many of those kids are able to see their future and the possibilities of having a university education.
Yeah,
Tom?
the,
Tom, you want to?
yeah, the university has another program for women. I think that's been very successful as well, and the same idea, right, Randy? I think that, and I've met those people and actually watched a class. I worked for Access TV for many years as an executive producer, and we went through a whole raft of things about curriculum and matching what they called learning objects to the curriculum. And I'll tell you, it was a nightmare working with Alberta Education. They really couldn't get their act together. And Perry Shulak and I were partners back then. And we managed to get a fair whack of money to do learning objects, but where those went and how they got used, and it was really advanced thinking. It would really help people now to use some of the stuff that we created. It was things like explaining GPS and various things like that. So, you know, I was just thinking last week when I was watching the people, I really have got away from it now. And I don't know how they're teaching this stuff to the kids at home now, where the parents are doing a lot of the teaching. And of course, teachers are trying to keep on curriculum. And the curriculum is God for these teachers. They either get it done or their jobs are on the line. And really, it's designed so that one thing leads to the next thing. I know you people, a lot of you people have more experience in that area, but it is a tough grind, and it must be a terribly tough grind for parents and teachers right now. And I just don't know how they're doing it. I have no idea what the class was like.
It was pointed out by someone to me yesterday that children that they were talking about are in the second or third grade and are sitting in front of a terminal for 6 hours.
Yeah.
These
And
are
how's that
7 and 8
interesting?
year old kids that are spending most of their day sitting in a chair looking at a screen, and that is education.
Yeah. But you know, we were doing some amazing things, like, you know,
That's pretty amazing.
maybe out there now. Yeah, I know. But the idea was to try and stimulate thinking and stimulate ideas, you know, using learning objects, which would tackle a certain subject. I went and did a bunch on social studies, and it showed all the different, this animation showed all the maneuvers of the War of 1812 against the Americans, right? And that adds stimulus. You know, the kid within a very quick time can see what the War of 1812 was, how the British got down to actually burn the White House, which is kind of relative right now. So anyway, but I don't know, ask Perry, you know, we did everything. And Perry's a magic animator and designer. So the stuff we created was just really magic, but gone.
Yeah, quite often, if I can speak, quite often when you develop anything based on any kind of technology, the technology moves along so fast that any initial investment that's put in vanishes. And so 5 years down the road, they're having to reinvent the wheel all over again. And you know, perhaps moving forward, we might be at a point where perhaps the technology will stabilize. But that's always the challenge in dealing with or developing any kind of content for Alberta Learning, is that it does have a finite timeline. And I guess also the other issue is that I'm not too sure if you've been following with what's been happening with curriculum development, but quite often it's politically motivated. So every time a new government comes in, they kind of scrape everything off that was done previous, and then they have to reboot the whole process again. And until they can define what the curriculum is, they can't actually move ahead and build content. So quite often they're spinning around trying to determine what they're going to teach before they move into the next phase where they can actually start building resources. And Alberta Ed hasn't been involved in building any resources for the last 10, 15 years.
So what are they doing with them?
We didn't have kids, native kids in school, did we? That didn't exist, right?
Uh-huh.
That's what they're wiping right now, isn't it?
You know, you talk about the curriculum becoming politicized. How can that be? I mean, we are taxpayers. We believe we've got a public education system which should be standardizing some form of content for students that is relevant to becoming good citizens, becoming learners, becoming productive workers. And we're politicizing that curriculum?
Yeah, well, what happens is the NDP comes in and they decide that, well, we have a whole different approach and way we want to kind of frame learning. And it all starts right down with the early levels. And usually their policies is based on probably very likely more diversifying the economy. But when the UCP came in, they pretty well threw everything out that the NDP did, and they reboot the whole process all over again. And then it becomes shifted because the UCP has a different vision of what learning should be. And then you kind of restart all over again. And then, you know, we have no idea what's going to happen next round, next election. But then what it does, it stifles the process.
So it would seem to me, I mean, as an outsider listening in and hearing that we are politicizing the content, and I'm saying this a little bit tongue in cheek, because I'm sure many of you are aware, maybe we've got to take government out of the equation as the content generator and have that developed independently of government. Let government worry about the methodologies and the infrastructure, but let some party that is not caught up in the politics put that curriculum together. Any comments in that regard? Randy, you probably saw some, well, less so I suspect at the university, but any comments regarding curriculum development and its politicization?
There's no question in my mind that is a huge problem, and any government is thinking 4 years at a time, as opposed to, we talked last week about doing things at 100-year plans, and boy, that really hit home very clearly, because this is a very important area. I spent some time in China, and the education system is so different over there, you guys. Have any of you been there, you'll know that they're building hundreds and hundreds of universities. Mm-hmm. And they're going to be so far ahead of North America in the next 50 to 100 years. It's scary. But yeah, I agree. The curriculum is a real major issue when it comes to government, because it changes too quickly. And a lot of the teachers are really struggling with this, because they're trying just to save their space and look after their careers and to look after the kids. Mm-hmm. But it's changing so fast for them that I think it's a major problem in our university as well. That there's structure and this infrastructure is there that doesn't change quickly.
Well, it's interesting. I'll share an observation, and Randy, you might have been at the university, and I think I shared this with many of you maybe in the last couple of weeks, but I was a strategic advisor to the Board of Governors at a provincial university for a couple of years. And at the conclusion of that period, and during that, I was asked to save the dental faculty and the Department of Education, both of which were saved, at least this, I won't get into the specifics, but the president of that university asked me to his office. Eric Newell was in the room at the time, because he could attest to this. And the president said, you've spent now 2-3 years with us. You've seen most of it. You've seen the Senate, you've worked with departments, you understand the dean structure. What would you advise a president of this university, such as me, in terms of what you've seen? And I said to him, your decision-making is flawed. It's way too slow in a world of rapid change. And he was very upset that I was being critical of the structure. But I would maintain that that's not just the university. That is a problem society at large is having, because change is happening so fast everywhere that the organizational structures of the past, which were built for administrative stability, today need to become nimble and fast and quick moving. And that is absolutely the opposite of why these organizational structures were put in place in the first place. So we've got a major rethink called for, in terms of the structure, particularly in public sector, which really owns the health and education in Canada. And yet, Randy, you're pointing out that we're in a global competition where knowledge is being imparted rapidly through the institutions. Others are adapting fast and we're adapting slow. Why? Jackie, you want to comment?
Just a clarification, Perry. If the systems and administration are the infrastructure and they don't change, is there anything that can be done from the inside, or is it something that has to come from the outside? Does the whole thing have to crumble down?
I thought of that the other day. Someone sent me a long email. He was very upset. Something had happened in the classroom for his son. And I'll tell you what it was. The teacher was advocating that what Trudeau is doing is marvelous. He is a wonderful individual, and the student should appreciate that. And the student in the classroom was quite concerned that there was a bias being expressed, which is something different than what he'd heard at home. So he came home and told his parents, and his parents were furious. So he wrote a long letter, and the long letter he was going to give to the teacher. And then he consulted with 7 people, and one of them said to him, I think maybe you should meet with him before you write it. But the one that helped the father best is he said, why doesn't the student go back and challenge the teacher? There's a learning opportunity there. That really was insightful. But there are problems at every level. That was a comment where it wasn't the curriculum that was politicized, it was the teacher who was politicized. I remember my grandson, first grade, coming home and saying, Dad, Granddad, you should vote orange, because the teacher was telling the kids what color to take home, and this is highly inappropriate. Not that orange is, but teachers advising and manipulating the kids at that age, that leads you to begin to think about the thought police of 1984. Maybe they're already in our midst and we didn't realize it.
So
Well,
maybe
that's
Tom, not a long one, go ahead.
yeah, that's why a lot of us are a bit nervous about this government that's in there now. Like I've got a grant I'm on right now, and I'm reluctant to say anything about them in case they get wind of it and suddenly say, "Oh, your grant's no good anymore." So
well, that didn't start with that didn't start with this government.
Yeah, no, that's true.
Right.
Yeah.
Randal, you have a comment? You're muted.
Yeah. You're raising some very good points, Perry. And I think I have to go back to my old rant about, the super exponential growth of civil complexity.
Wait. What are those words?
Super or compounded exponential growth of civil complexity. There's a network theory that shows every time you add one more person to a network, the number of relationships grows at an exponential rate. And the same is true about ideas. You come up with a new idea in let's say a semantic net, and suddenly there's a whole new raft of meanings that emerge from that. And every time you add a new tool to your household, it changes the pattern of relationships in your household. This is going on at every level of existence in civilization. We're not aware of it. We keep pruning our thought processes and memory of how simple things used to be. But education is supposed to prepare us for a future, but as we are each other's environment, we're not able to actually ever catch up. There's a scaling law of nature that says there's a limit to how big and complex systems can be. It's universal, and I believe that we are perhaps reaching an upper limit on this scale of civilization that is manageable.
Okay, well, let's pick up on that. I mean, education is a system. When we started and we didn't have a system, you had a teacher in a little white classroom who took care of kids for grades 1 to 6, and she did her very best, and society grew from there. But you're right, entropy occurs. We get increased complexity with time.
Yes.
Maybe there is a point in time where we can't have a system anymore. And what would education look like if we didn't have a system? Well, that parent that was confused and upset with his teacher, if we didn't have a system, would go where he would be happier. He would make a choice of what teacher he wanted or what school he wanted, and you'd give him choice. Because if today the choice is with the government, maybe tomorrow the choice should be with the parent. Well, that's a voucher system. There are people that really rail against that, unions in particular. But what about giving parents more choice in terms of the education of their children? Is that not the future?
It is, except that
Go ahead, Ken. Ken, I'll call on you next, Randy. Go ahead, Ken.
Oh, me?
Yeah,
Okay.
Go ahead.
The point you were making is concerning, because what would happen is, if you talk about these choice things that you make, it goes back to individual bubbles. So all the parents who are staunch UC peers and all the parents who are staunch ND peers go to their separate camps, and never the twain shall meet. So I think that's the bigger concern of trying to have these choice systems.
But let me pick up on that. But if a parent feels that the system is being dominated by one or the other, shouldn't they have the choice to go elsewhere?
Well, I'm not sure that we have the perception that things are dominated by each other, much as we assess media. We assess media as being the side that has the opposite view is the bad side and avoid. And we're on the good side. So we're always on the good side.
Well, I think the argument can be presented that what they're really balking about is a system of vanilla, that everybody needs to abide by a system. And yet we're in a world of increased complexity, and to expect that much of a system to meet the wide array of needs that society needs is becoming impossible.
But we have been. I mean, if you use the example of the single room schoolhouse with all the grades and so on,
Right.
You can't possibly compare the amount of knowledge that is being transferred in that environment versus the environment that we have today. It's miles and miles away ahead of what the one-room schoolhouse was.
Except in math. I'll pick up on that, because I had an argument this past week on exactly that point, that we're not doing better. There's some say we're not doing well at all. And in fact, we're falling behind because the systems which we have are not responding fast enough. And what we've done in math, for example, we've fallen behind. So I'm confused. I'm not sure the system is responding. And
falling behind is again one of those relative things, because we were way ahead of, let's say, Cambodia. We always have to maintain that lead over Cambodia forevermore. Or if they do something wonderful in Cambodia and they pick up, do we say, oh, compared to Cambodia, we aren't doing as well?
no, I'm simply pointing out the point that on the tests, we're doing poorly. I'm not saying by by comparing ourselves with ourselves, we're not doing as well as we were. Jackie.
Just taking it to a different direction, and I don't know the answer to this, so I wonder if anyone can make a comment. What if the system was some sort of hybrid of what you're suggesting, Perry? Back in the old days, you went to the same, grade 1 through 6, and then sometime in the junior high, you got picked for, here's the path to trade school, here's the path to academics, here's the path to working retail, whatever those segments are. I know other countries do it or used to do it. So what if we did that here, and then it would be led by that industry, those experts? The apprenticeship kind of model is what I'm suggesting.
Yep.
That's all I know. I'm wondering if anyone else.
It's very European. I mean, I'm well aware of that because my wife came out of that system. So I'm well aware of the streaming. And in fact, I think when I was in 7th or 8th grade, they sent you off on tests. They came back, they sat down with you and your parents, they gave you some feedback, and you made some decisions as to what path to take, but it was your choice. Or in French immersion, they hit you after the first year, and you sit down as a parent with the teacher and talk about whether your child will stay the path or go over to English. So personal choice seems to me a critical part of keeping parents involved in the system as well. Go ahead, Laura.
One thing that popped into my mind, well, two things. You had questioned how curriculum can change back about 5 minutes ago. And one of the things the Board of Education in Ontario was doing, they were bringing in outside groups to look after specific subject areas, such as geography. And so that's how I got involved on that piece, was in the creation of the textbook for that. But these were people who were working in the field of geography and its derivatives, and they sat down to tell how they thought geography would evolve. And so things that had not been taught in the geography curriculum up until then, including livability in cities, for example, became something that they thought would be important to have included in the textbooks and in the curriculum. So that and another piece is travel. When I was young, we used to do exchanges in schools, not just even inside Canada, but across countries as well. And that learning of being put into a different environment is actually quite remarkable for how much it changes your individual view on the world. Your individual view suddenly gets much larger and broadens the understanding. And in this time of cultural literacy, if you will, I think it's something that we need to see how that can be included. And just one last quick thing. When I moved to Canada, I went to an elementary school, and before school started in September, we met with the principal, and he said the children in their school had never seen anybody who wasn't white. And so he had no idea how they would respond. My first day of school, the teacher, this was in grade 6, and the teacher pulled down the big map of the world that used to hang in front of the blackboard, and he put a dot on it showing where I had come from, and then showed where Edmonton was. And he said every Monday morning I would tell the students something about how I grew up, where I grew up, and they would share something about growing up in Canada. And that was a wonderful exchange, and I felt included right away. And I mean, we did have some challenges in differences and so on, but we always were able to work it out. So I think we all left grade 6 being a little bit richer than just the standard curriculum. So much of it is what the teacher sees and what the teacher can work with outside the curriculum, inside the classroom, just with the children there.
So sometimes you run into somebody special
Yeah.
as a teacher,
Yeah.
and it impacts you for life. I mean, I'm sure we all have a teacher. It might have been a very bad teacher, or someone that really had an impact on us in our lives, or opened our eyes to something. And I can recall his name was Brucci. He was German, and in fact, he'd had a lot of problems in our town during World War II because he was German. And there were a lot of parents that were somewhat suspicious of him. But he had a major impact on me in, I think it was 7th grade, where he gave us an open assignment. And I was to look at unions as a trust. And he gave me some books to read about the behavior of unions during the 20s, 30s, and 40s, which gave me some insights into the role that unions can play and what trust busting and trusts are all about. I think it had an impact on my thinking. It turned out that my grandmother, who was German English, was the nurse for Senator Wagner. And it was the Wagner legislation in the United States that helped in trust busting. So I had some exposure to that part of the world. I don't think it ever really left me. It helped impart that change can happen. It gave me a sense of when power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. It was an amazing experience. And that was 7th grade. And I'm not sure that in his passing years, he knew that there was someone out there who was still carrying that experience that he'd given me. And I'm sure we all have something like that to share. And that's not in curriculum. That's methods. Randal.
Yeah, I think it's helpful to get down to the essential kernel of what we are as learning, think and do beings. We only do two things. We act and we learn. And when you look at it that way, the subject that we're talking about in terms of education is only the formal institutionalized portion of our learning processes. But we do learn in every instant we're alive. And we have almost arbitrarily, or at least by legacy traditions, decided that certain things need to be institutionalized in our education system. But I think as our world becomes more chaotic, we need to be more agile and be able to find what are the essential things in life that we need to know in order to navigate the complexities. That is, how do I find opportunities and threats and navigate our way so we can actualize our potential in this complex civilization.
Those are beautiful words, Randal. I'm not quite sure how you execute that.
Well, one analogy is how in the early 1990s, we had the internet, but we didn't have the web. Well, we didn't have ways to communicate a lot of data, or like in pictures and video, through the twisted pair copper. So we used compression algorithms to reduce the complexity to the simpler components that make up those images. What I'm suggesting is that we look at things like the laws of nature and understand that these are laws that will help us understand every phenomenon that's out there. We need to get that into our worldviews early on in life so we can interpret the very diverse kinds of things in terms of the expression of those simple universal laws and forces.
So you're saying we need to give first graders physics?
Yes, whatever capacity they have for understanding things like logic and causation.
Okay.
Yeah.
Say, Jill, you've been rather quiet and you're new to the family. What do you bring to the table? And pick on anything. We've covered the map. I mean, this elephant's huge. And,
well, my passion would be more in university education. And I feel that we're sitting at a great opportunity where we can shift and begin to talk about the purpose of advanced education or post-secondary education as a means to inspire learning and to inspire those students to go out into the world rather than to prepare them. I think that we get all caught up in knots when we carry the weight of preparing today's youth for going forward. And more often than not, we're looking down at them or from our perspective. And I think if we made a fundamental shift in wanting to inspire them to go out into the world and inspire them to create and to be impactful and to feel they have a role to play in our communities and in our economy, then I think we'd see a transformation in the subject matter offered, in the level of engagement offered. And I think there's real opportunity with this recent tech-focused presentation as well. And I'm an optimist, and I believe it's an opportunity for students to have a louder voice and to realize there's some options. And when you've spoken, Perry, on the challenges of changing and shifting infrastructure and how these other countries can innovate quicker than we are, I think so often it's because they don't have to undo what's been done. And they can start today, and they can start with fresh eyes, and they can create and pay attention to the direction we're moving in, rather than defending how we got here, why we got here, and how important it is to stay here. So I'm very focused, and I love talking about advanced education. And I love that technology has maybe inspired many more people to learn something and to feel that they can participate in learning by having access to much greater content and not having to physically be in one particular spot for that.
Well, online learning is probably one of the most brilliant concepts then, because you can literally shop the world for information and shop the world for webinars. And I can recall teaching special needs, and not children, but teaching how one goes about choosing and making choices in diet. And it turns out young kids make perfect choices. They may go to grab candy, but when you give them the choices, they will pick the right diet. Well, the same with education. What if we give people more choice instead of imposing a curriculum on them? Let them make more individual choices about what direction they want to go with a minimum of these boundaries. Come on back, Jill. Let's hear what you have to say as a response.
Okay. Sure. Well, again, for me, I have 4 children that have 2 are finishing up at universities and 2 are recently out. And they all were quite focused on their areas of study, but the curriculum in place forced them into taking courses that were of no interest. They had to fulfill a fine art requirement or 2 or 3, or a natural sciences. And I think that it's so important that those options are available for people that are interested in it. But when you are making the choice to be in advanced education and you're paying to be in advanced education, I believe that you should have full choice in the courses you study, and especially to this extent that if you choose to be in I'm just going to say the business faculty, you shouldn't not be able to take a business course because you have to fill that slot with a fine arts course. And I think we're getting frustrated students that are being forced to make these choices, and it's an outdated curriculum.
Well, I mean, I could be a bit smartass here and say then they should leave and go elsewhere where they can make choices.
And what happens when they do leave and go elsewhere, Perry? What happens to these institutions and how effective are they going to be? And if we're talking about trying to keep more choices on the table, why are we priding ourselves by limiting them?
Well, but I think you're making my point. I get tired, and I'm not going to be nasty here, but I get tired of people playing victim to systems. If you don't like it, move on. That parent that was telling me about the frustration they had with the student, maybe he should have said, I'm going elsewhere. I'm taking my kid elsewhere. I'll go private.
So somebody who is paid to have an education shouldn't be able to choose the courses they're taking?
They should be. They should be able to choose which institution they want to go to. And they should choose that institution based on it fulfilling what is that they're buying and they want.
And so there's no onus on the institution to make change. It's always the person should
If the institution is smart, it will align its curriculum in such a way that it will meet the needs of individuals who I'm talking market forces. Go ahead.
But who's listening to market forces? It sounds like the market, the consumer, the student isn't allowed to have a role in the conversation about the curriculum. Their role is just choosing from A or B, but they can't try to stay within that institution, which is a local institution, and make it better.
Yeah, but no, I think, I mean, I agree with your point that the institution should, within boundaries, be able to allow an individual to make some choices within reason. But I'm also saying that if that institution is not serving that person's needs, that person should have the courage, the gall, the encouragement to go elsewhere or bail out and go out into life for a while. Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, internationally, we have one of the best computer science and computer engineering programs in the world. Every year we're turning out these bright kids, and I, over the years, have hired a lot of them and hired kids from NATE. And the thing I liked about the university people was that their education was broader. And even then, a lot of them couldn't write. Their English was abominable, and I'd have to correct their English for them and everything else. But generally, the difference between the two levels of schooling, and it may have changed by now, was that the NAIT kids certainly could come into my office and almost very quickly work with some of the computer software that I needed. But the University of Alberta kids had that extra year or two, and they got a broader education. So if I made some reference, and I've got an arts degree, I hire programmers, and if if I made some reference or whatever, I would get a chuckle. But the NAIT students, that was concentrated on the technical skills and all this stuff. So I would disagree. I think that there are certain courses at the university that should be required for engineering staff and for science, computer science students. And I just saddens me. I've talked to the dean of that department not too long ago, a year ago actually, or a year and a half ago. And he said all of the students are going elsewhere. You know, they can't get the jobs that they want. And of course, now our entrepreneurship area is being destroyed in Alberta. No, it's too negative. It's being weakened in Alberta. It's very sad that these kids can't stay here. You know, that saddens me.
So
but I just think that the extra courses are very important.
okay, you've made at least 3 points there, but
Yeah.
I'll let Barry pick on. Barry, go ahead. You're muted. I think you're aware of that.
Yeah, I'm aware of that.
Yeah.
Anyway, most of you probably don't know me, and those that do would be surprised to know that I had 7 years on the board of a college that is probably, and show my bias, the leading post-secondary in Canada. And I had the privilege of being there and chairing it in the centennial, chairing the board in the centennial year. But some of the things that we did because we were never in the bullseye of anybody. And we made arrangements to bring people into the college that had a struggle getting out of high school. And we always said that our target student was somebody that had an average between 55 and 60. And that was when I went on the board. And by the time I left the board, that wouldn't get you close. But what I'm talking about, because I think there's a learning here that's an Alberta learning. I'm talking about Olds College. And all the presidents of the universities say, Olds is different. Well, damn it, we weren't different. We were providing a service, an education service to a big sector of Albertans. And we made decisions like when we were 90% dependent on government grants that we were going to target being 15 to 20%. And that if you get down to that level, and we didn't get down to that in the 7 years, but we were down to 40, you become independent of the problem of the politicians coming in and jumping down your neck and telling you to go this direction when you should be going that direction.
So you're arguing that competition plays an important role, that Olds was competing, it was looking at its students, it was looking at a broad array of what should be offering, and you feel it was doing a better job. You're responding to market forces in the shaping of your curriculum.
Exactly, Perry. And what I would use as an example of that is our School of Agribusiness had 95 to 100% employment in the industry they wanted to be in when they graduated. And by Christmas of their graduation year, the universities weren't even close to that. We had, my last year on the board, we had 25% of our input of our incoming had undergrad degrees, because we could teach them what they needed to know in the industry called agriculture, food, and rural development. And they had by that time gone through university and said, we don't know how to go into the business world, even though we may be from rural or we may be from urban, in rural Alberta or rural the world. That university, I think, still has accreditation as a university in China. And they just don't understand why we weren't a university and aren't a university. There's a very good role of the college system playing the, if you will, master's training role for undergrads coming out of the university system. And more and more the trend was that way. We used to say we teach kids how to work in the industry they want to work. The reason why we had the business success as far as students were concerned was basically the Cargills of the world's comment would always be, here's what we want, and you give us students that we have to train from a corporate perspective, but we don't have to train them how to do business in the rural world and in the food industry.
What's particularly intriguing, though, of what you're sharing with us, Barry, is that your institution, which is a system, was nimble enough to listen to what the market was saying, which changes rapidly, and was adjusting the way the institution was behaving. Now, when Jill commented that she saw her children were seeing, the system is rigid and that they couldn't make the choices, or that the offerings weren't there, would imply that either the system needed to individualize its orientation, or the student needed to find a prof that said, I'll teach you on a one-on-one basis. I don't know how far we can go, but it does seem to me market forces are in fact one of the vehicles to enable and to push the system to adapt. And if we deny the market by having government pay for everything, where you're looking above instead of looking at the market for what you should be doing, we got a problem. My conclusion from both of these discussions is, if you want to get nimble and you want to make the systems more flexible in a time of rapid change, you got to loosen the bonds of government funding and start looking at some way to have industry and or the individual play a role in making choices so that the system is flexible. Edmonton School Board did that to some extent by changing the various options or streams that student had in terms of the focus of their individual school programs. Haley, you might want to comment here. You've got some familiarity with market forces being applied right at the educational level of high school students. You want to comment?
Sure. Actually, there's a lot I'd like to comment on, but I was listening to everybody else's comments first. I don't know if this is the appropriate time for me to chime in. What I've heard, if I can reflect, a lot of talk on curriculum, who's in control of curriculum. I've heard from Randy Olson that China's going to get far ahead of us. They're going to be way out ahead. And I have to ask, in what? And I hear from Jill, and it's really worth repeating what Jill said, is that we need a systemic shift on priorities and talking about inspiring a child. See, when Randal, I think it was you who said we have two opposites, we act or we learn. And I'm gonna say my double-sided coin is we create and we consume. And we can do that with education as well. We're still talking about education as something we consume. We're talking about consumers, we're talking about providers, but there's so little talk about why we're educating in the first place. What to prepare a child for what? Are you prepared with all your education, all your degrees combined? Were any of you prepared for this pandemic? Was anybody prepared for 9/11? You cannot prepare adequately for the future, but you can help, and you can inspire people to help. And the things that we're preparing people for right now, sorry, I have a cat who hasn't seen me all day. It seems that we're trying to prepare people to become economic cogs in our society. We're not training people, we're not guiding people to become better citizens and what that looks like. And with this online learning, I have to admit I didn't hear all of the webinar last time, but nobody's really talking about the capacity for learning that's changed so much. We are learning in captivity now. The only studies about learning in captivity have been done on zoo animals. And our children are not zoo animals, and we're still talking about providing them with a product that they can consume to what benefit. So to circle through all of this, I would challenge everybody to first think of why we educate in the first place. We're still talking about subjects. Jill, you talked about fine arts. We heard about geometry or physics, and there is zero talk about interdisciplinary studies. And that is a benefit that could be found in online learning, but there is no connectivity. We still have to find our way through that. So I'm at a loss. I don't know if there's a right or a wrong. We have, I don't know if this has been mentioned, but you know that the current curriculum in Alberta has been in place since 1985. That's frightening. We're still learning the same things. We still have the same curricular outcomes from 1985. So that should frighten everybody. And then it's all based on subject learning. And the talk about, well, I sent my kids away out of the country so they could have an interdisciplinary education, because it simply did not exist here. The only studies or interdisciplinary studies center at the university was shut down about 10, 12 years ago. So I'm not optimistic. I hope you all are, but I'm not. And I don't see any push for systemic change. I think it can happen. I've been advocating for arts integration, and that as one small component, but primarily as a vehicle for inspiring and for innovation. And I think perhaps those capacities, and let me touch on the streaming, because that's something that gets me going too. Streaming is based on a premise that intelligence is static, and intelligence is not. We have various capacities for intelligence. And I think that the one that is left out of the online learning is empathy. And if we're not prioritizing empathy as a capacity in our learning systems, then we're gonna see this. And I wonder when we're gonna see this. And I think after 10 years of advocating this doorway, I think we're seeing it now. I think we're seeing it horribly. So those are just challenges. I would love to move from the challenges to potential solutions at some point. And I do think that the change needs to be systemic and focusing on inspiring, as Jill said, and interdisciplinary studies. There's my rant.
Go ahead,
I'll mute
Randy.
now.
I'm listening with great interest, everybody. I think the biggest, you mentioned earlier, Perry, I think one of the biggest issues we have now is we expect the governments to do everything from an educational perspective. And you go down to, the US does a lot of things right, but they do a lot of things wrong as well. But every major university, Yale, Princeton, Harvard, are all funded by private alumni. And so the bulk of their financing comes from the private industry. In Canada, we expect the government to do everything. And we're getting caught, we're getting our wheels stuck in the mud. And the best example I can give you is when David Suzuki was given his honorary doctorate at the U of A, it raised such a commotion that a lot of the major corporations backed out of sponsoring the university because of him getting a doctorate. At a time when we need all these corporations and these major donors to help give our universities some independence rather than being governed by the government of the day.
Universities need more independence. That's interesting. They ask for more money. Are they asking for more independence? Because I can remember my son asking for more independence, and I said, I can give it to you if you're ready. Are the universities ready for more independence? And I'll tell you, I don't think so. I organize reunions frequently, and I organized a reunion for the graduate students of the psychology department at the U of A. And you know who showed up? 100 years worth, or 100, about 25 years worth of students showed up, but not one professor. When we looked for whether or not they even knew who their alumni were, they didn't know who their alumni were. When we see money being pulled back from the university, they send their students to march on the legislature. They don't go to their alumni and say, alumni, you love this university. We need a helping hand. Give us a pitch. It's time for Canada to begin to grow up and grow beyond simply the building of institutions that government wants, to beginning to build institutions that are built for people, by people. And I think that's not a criticism. That's a recognition of the maturity of this country and the maturity of the institutions that we have. It's time to recognize that maturity and begin to turn them to become more responsive to society rather than responsive to government. I've worked with regulated utilities, and most of the time they spend their time lobbying government because that's their source of funding. Not listening to the student, not listening to the customer, not listening to the client. And in the economy that we're in, the economy we're going into, those who listen to the customer best are going to be the winners, not those that listen to government best. A little bit of a rant there, but let's get a comment. Barry, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm on your bandwagon.
Okay, next
and
then.
Yeah, yeah. But you've got to connect that to this institution has to have in its culture, built into its culture, how you react and respond quickly to what's happening in the marketplace. And without that, you're going to have to be dependent on government. And
but that's simply a transition. That's not saying it's wrong. That's saying we need to begin to prepare to make that transition, or we're going to get shocked. And maybe the only way to do it is the way McNamara did it in the US, is he would cut government contracts and throw engineers into the street who then became entrepreneurs and built local economies in the North Carolina Triangle, in the Belt Parkway, and in Silicon Valley. I've often thought about what happens if we terminate a university. What would happen if we terminated a university? What would happen? Would they all go on unemployment? Would they become tutors? Would they find positions in government? What would they do? Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, just a couple of points related to Barry there, in agriculture. There's a great book I read on innovation, and they were talking about how India today would be starving if some genius over in I can't remember what part of the world, I combined a very good wheat with a Japanese wheat that had a very short stalk that could withstand monsoons. And as a result, they were able to grow like twice the amount of grain that they could grow before without having it all destroyed by falling. And so I just keep thinking about agriculture and how important it is to us that we look at agriculture as a profession, and an important profession after all the shadowing we've got from the oil industry.
In our discussion, there's a bit of yin and yang. There are those that are of the belief that the student is not really prepared to be a shopper. And if he wants to become an engineer, he needs to get into that stream and accept the fact that those that know what engineers need to be, they're going to have to accept that curriculum. But there are others that feel that maybe we need to be a little bit more open-minded, and the university or whatever institution is need to be sufficiently flexible to offer a wide range of experiences to those individuals because they haven't yet made their minds up. Now, can a university accommodate both with an arts program that provides a wide array of experiences and curriculum and choices to the individual who hasn't yet made the choice to become an engineer, a doctor, or a businessman? The U of A tries it, but it seems to be dominated by its professional commitments to help people who have made a choice and move through into that profession, whereas those that haven't yet made their minds up are encouraged to prepare by taking an arts program or an earlier program at a community level.
Barry, all I can say to you is the market did a very good job on Sears, did a very good job on people like Neiman Marcus, did a very good job on Holt Renfrew.
Yeah, it really did. It told them you're irrelevant.
No, it isn't irrelevant. Why can't we replace the university? Why can't the university have to compete in the market?
Well, I think you're echoing my sentiment. I mean,
exactly.
If a university is not delivering, if Jill is dissatisfied and she is a payer, then that university, you would think, would adapt and start to modify its program, or someone else would step up and say, there's a market there for the Jills of this world. I think there are options out there, but you'd have to probably go to the US to find them. Go ahead, Randy.
There'd be an Amazon university pretty soon.
But there is, and there are programs in the States that Amazon is absolutely creating curriculum and saying, if you do these 10 courses, we will not only give you a certification if that's important to you, way more important, we'll give you a job. And we're ignoring, I think often, or some, well, not in this panel, I mean, universities are ignoring that a job and a career is an outcome that many of the students are there to pursue.
Right.
And I want to circle back so that I'm not mistaken for thinking that I think every student should be able to just do whatever they want and there should be no curriculum and there should be no basis. What I am saying is the university is uniquely set up to provide a great number of courses, and University of Calgary, I think, does a great job in the breadth of their offering. And now I think they should just pivot slightly and allow the students to pursue the areas that are being offered at the university within the faculties that they have chosen, if they want to learn more within those faculties, instead of demanding that they go outside of their faculty of interest and take other courses. If they have an interest outside, sure, take it, let it be a choice. But why are we limiting the choice of these students that are paying, that are committing their time and their money and their hopefulness that they are going to have this experience that inspires them to go and be productive participants in our economy?
Jill, you know, I think we need to be a little realistic about something. When a university has 55,000 students to satisfy, its capacity to individualize its instruction is going to be rare. And those students that are seeking something more individualized need to go to a smaller program or find a program that does, in fact, fit what they're looking for.
Well, I don't think it's as, I think I'm having a disconnect with you, Perry, on getting across. I don't think it should be so individualized. I think there's already these course loads being offered and these courses being offered. And I think that there are courses that have 8 members in them, and then there are courses that have 100 students in them. And I think that certainly universities are able to use data, use information, and now with online capabilities, if there is a pent-up need for a certain subject area, do you just keep saying year after year, we're going to cap that at 30 students that can take it? Or is that something that the university or the faculties should be responsive to and say, you know, every year we have a waiting list in this stream of courses. Why are we not being progressive in providing that to more students and being responsive to the interest that's being shown by our grassroots consumers, the students?
Okay, let me try another angle at this. It's conceivable they don't have an instructor to do that, and that the instructors need retraining.
I'm not asking for new courses. I'm saying the courses that are being offered, why they're not being offered for the students that want to take them. I'm not saying reinvent the courses. I'm not saying even bring new courses, although certainly I hope that they will. But I'm saying that if you know that these courses are in high demand, then make them available.
You want to comment, Randy?
Yeah, the biggest thing I can show you is that you take a look at, for example, Microsoft a couple of years ago was looking for somebody that was an expert in CAD/CAM technology to develop three-dimensional faxes, which is the wave of the future and the way things are going. There wasn't one eligible person in North America. They had to go to Beijing and Moscow to get that technology because North America, and especially Canada, isn't training in the areas that we are going to need 1,500 years from now.
And yet we've got professors that were tenured on the knowledge that they had 20 years ago and are making a good salary imparting knowledge that is now 10, 20 years old. I comment about, I understand that the welding program at NATA is now being overhauled, but during the peak construction period, the welding program was offering technology which was 10, 15 years old.
Yeah.
Because because that's what the instructors had to offer. If the universities are going to be nimble and our educational system from the beginning to the end is going to be nimble, it's got to become more adaptive. And we've been giving certificates to instructors based on knowledge today that is irrelevant tomorrow. We can't continue to do that. We've got to give certificates to learners, to people that are prepared to continuously learn and adapt in keeping with both the market and the emergence of knowledge as it's happening in society. And we have built systems which are rigid, status quo oriented. And I think that's my frustration, is systems in a period and a time of rapid change are not adapting. And we will find ourselves in trouble, provincially, nationally, and internationally, if we continue.
So I guess the question.
Go ahead, Perry, yes.
Is this an issue of unionization? Because very much like the K-12 system, unions make it that much more difficult to move people in and out of the system on whether they're capable or not. Is it the same case for a university?
Some of the more advanced unions, as I understand, and I can remember when there were some programs that were running in Banff and in Jasper in partnership with the unions, and they were willing to embrace the necessity for continuous learning as a partner. And I think that's what that's in essence what we're looking for, is partners that are committed to a similar set of principles to keep us adaptive and competitive. Go ahead. Freeman, we haven't heard from you, and we haven't heard from you, Dennis. Any comments you want to offer at this point?
Yeah, sure.
Go ahead, Freeman.
Yeah, so I guess maybe just on the recent point about systems adapting to change, I
could you speak up, please?
Oh, is it pretty quiet?
Yeah.
Is that better? Okay.
Yeah.
In terms of your recent comment about systems adapting to change, I absolutely agree with you, Perry. That is the problem that we're all dealing with here, is we have outdated systems. I sit on the board for apprenticeship and industry training here in Alberta.
Mm-hmm.
And we're having these conversations right now. What I'm seeing in the conversations that are happening in these circles, it's talking about now competencies, mapping competencies in programs, mapping competencies, whether it's in universities or in post-secondary, and then and managing those ultimately. I think it's going to be a micro credentialed type of world moving forward, something where you're tracking competencies kind of small metric by small metric, and along with your experience and your academic education towards that competency, and continuous training type of system in the future. Like that's for us to get there, it's obviously there's a number of hurdles, but that's the future that I'm definitely seeing.
How difficult is it for change to occur at the apprenticeship level? I mean,
it's impossible right now. I'll tell you right now.
How can that be? How can it be impossible to learn when in fact the very institutions that are selling the business are supposedly learning institutions, and yet they will not change? How can that be?
Something really interesting. I don't know how much any of you know about the apprenticeship and industry training system here in Alberta. We're unique actually in Canada and in the world. We have about an 800 person volunteer system here in Alberta that branches out to every apprenticeship and occupation. And by provincial law, there must be a provincial action committee for every one of these apprenticeships. So what it does is it provides link to industry up into the apprenticeship system. So which is really great in terms of getting that feedback, like providing that kind of closed feedback loop. But it still needs a bunch of improvement. But by the time that feedback loop in terms of, you know, say what they want for curriculum, the PAC will make those sorts of decisions, work on that. That goes filtered up to the board. The board makes that approval. The minister makes the approval. Then it goes to the institutions to develop the curriculum, and so on and so forth. So when you get a rapidly changing industry like, you know, electrical or automotive tech or heavy equipment technician, they're not keeping up. The system is absolutely not keeping up.
So innovation is becoming an enemy of systems.
100%. Yeah, it's way too slow.
And the individuals that embrace those innovations because they're excited to practice and they've been grown up to see change every single year in the world that they're living in, are then confronted with the institutions or the careers that say, you need to stay on the assembly line and do what we told you for the rest of your life. They don't buy it, they'll go elsewhere.
And the new generation, they're looking at they're saying, no, like this is a gig economy. Like we can spread our knowledge and our expertise across industries. So let us do that.
So that superstructure, that you spoke of, that seems to be committed to status quo and resistant to change, who can blow it up?
We have to, as the people, like industry has to. We have to. I think we have to look at adding a different dimension, and that different dimension to all this is starting to make the connections between all things. Like
okay, I'm gonna ask Ron for a moment. Ron Main, you're out there someplace. I can't find you.
Yeah, thanks, Barry. I want to go back to what you were saying about the engineers at the university, as one of the probably few engineers on the panel here. I went to university in the 70s, and back then they were talking about, you know, you had to have diversity in your education, and the statistics were that after 5 years after graduation, most engineers were in management, and you should have this well-rounded background. So I took business courses, I took law, I took logic, I took appreciation of classical music, I took appreciation of art, and several other courses like that. When I tried to get a job after, I found out that industry, when they're having a new hire, somebody straight out of university, they want you trained for a specific engineering function, a basic engineering function, and they don't care a tweet about any of the other stuff. And for the most part, that made it fairly difficult for me to get a good position straight out of university. But I've persevered with diversity since then, and at senior levels, yeah, it applies then. So maybe at a postdoctorate level, or that is good. But at the bachelor's level, most companies hiring straight out of people out of university, they don't care about that diversity. They want you to be able to fulfill a specific narrow job function.
Yeah, but Ron, you know, down the road, you must say that those other courses must have added to the texture of your life.
Yes, down the road, but I could just as easily have taken those as extracurricular courses or something after that.
Would you have done that though?
Yeah, I'm still a continuous learner.
Yeah, we all are. Yeah.
I'm
Dennis, you're next. Go ahead. Thank you, Ron. Dennis.
I guess the basic thing that strikes me is that we pose more questions than really answers. Questions I have is, what are we trying to prepare for? Let's think. We landed on Mars yesterday. What does it take to be able to do that? What are we doing about the new financial structure? Bitcoin, for example, we have 3 or 4 systems now running at astronomical rates, and yet we can't get a handle on, is that a change? Is that changing our entire financial structure? What is it in the education process that prepares us to live and adapt and even work within that? So there's my profound statement for the day.
Well, it's interesting, Dennis, and I think I commented on this last time. When I graduated and I went to work for government, I was of the assumption that my role was to maintain the status quo, because that's when an administrator was told is, here is your program. You need to make sure people stay within the boundaries of that program. Then we got into 5-year planning, and I began to become confused because things were beginning to happen that meant what we were doing was not the right thing for the next 5 years. We needed to start to change. So you began to see the word change show up. Then it was the rate of change became the issue, not change in itself, but the rate of change. And that continuum continues today, that the rate of change continues to grow. So when you say preparing someone for the future, what does change do? Well, change triggers learning. And those that are adapting are those that are learning to adapt as a product of the changing situation, the changing environment, the changing knowledge. So if we need to do anything, we need to train students to become learners, to be adapters and not be afraid of change, but to embrace it. And I think Haley's got some comments around innovation and the necessity, without getting too carried away and make sure the fundamentals are intact, that we should not have students graduating that are afraid of change. They should realize, and every institution, instead of thinking like administrators, should be constantly telling the students that they better get ready to be embracing change for the rest of their lives. It isn't going to go away, not for some time yet. Go ahead, Lorenz. Lorenz is up next. You're still muted, Lorenz.
Thank you very much, Perry.
Yep.
Are there any other professors from the U of A here today?
I made sure we only got one.
So it's taking a lot of courage to speak up then, because it's like a brick wall against the university here. No. And I'm having the courage, so I'm finding it. So why am I the only professor? Is because I'm an emeritus professor of mechanical engineering. Emeritus, which means I have some merit, but I have no salary. I'm semi-retired. Now, the thing is, why aren't there any other professors? It's because they're working 6 or 7 days a week. And why are they doing that? It's because they're switching over to this online business, but also, at least in my faculty, and this is the point I want to make with regard to all these comments about the university, what would happen if you shut it down? And why do you have such a narrow thing? The narrow thing is, in engineering, in a profession, it's a language. In order to be able to communicate with other professors to land that lander on Mars, they all speak the same language. And the reason those other professors aren't here is because 20 years ago they got tenure, yeah, but man, it doesn't matter. Even if you're a full professor, you're pounded on to continually be doing research, getting grants to keep things. And I'm just saying this is in engineering. I'm not saying this is everywhere. And that's the whole thing in this conversation, is the university is not homogeneous. It's very heterogeneous. And so those professors are working on getting grants so that they could be on the top of the technology. Not quite there, because they have to interact with the people who are actually out there making all the money doing it, but they have to be able to support it and create it. So those are some of the things I wanted to say, and I know we never go past 5:30, so I'll shut up. Thank you.
Oh my goodness, it is 5:30. Where the hell did time go? I figured we were just on a roll, just getting started. I don't like going beyond 5:30. I tell you what, we're going to wrap it up now, but if you want to stick around, I think we'll continue to chat for a few more minutes. So Claire, let's call it a day when it comes to recording. You're more than welcome to hang around. I don't think there's any reason why we have to go, but if you wish to sign off, it is 5:30 and you might have an obligation that you have to meet. But this has been, it's chaotic. I think those that came here and expected to talk curriculum or innovation or a piece of the puzzle are probably somewhat disappointed, but it's probably a reflection of what's happening in a period of rapid change. Lorenz, I appreciate how hardworking everybody is today, and I can't deny that. And I don't want to use that as an excuse or pretend that I'm being cute about hardworking people aren't necessarily doing the right thing. They are. The system today demands of them exactly what you said. They got to write grants. If they're going to do research, they want to stay on top of their field, and they have a little bit of time in order to instruct. That's the reality. But they might say something's wrong. This is not what the system should be. They should have more free time to be creative and innovative and to be thinking.
I'm going to turn off the recorder now, so anything you say from now on is off the record, so go for it.
Yeah. Well, I would like to ask, we've touched on the necessity